The strange curse of awareness. Why social spaces exhaust you. Imagine walking into a room and instantly noticing everything. Not just the people, but the energy between them. The subtle shifts in tone, the micro-expressions, the tension behind a smile, the way someone's eyes flicker with discomfort before they even speak. You see it all, you feel it all, and you don't know how to not notice. You laugh when you're supposed to. You nod politely. You navigate conversations like a diplomat in enemy territory. But when you walk away, you're drained not because you dislike people, but because you experience too much of them. That's the strange curse of awareness. The more awake you are to subtlety, the more exhausting ordinary social spaces become. This isn't about shyness. It's not about introversion. It's not even about anxiety, although all of those things can exist alongside it. What we're talking about here is something deeper, something harder to name, a kind of hyper-attunement to reality, a sensitivity to patterns, moods, contradictions, and unspoken dynamics. And while some people might call this emotional intelligence or perception, those words fail to capture the weight of it. Because when you live with this kind of awareness, you're not just engaging with people, you're absorbing them. You're analyzing constantly. You're bracing for impact even when no threat is present. You're managing your own expression while monitoring everyone else's. You're not just in the room. You're holding the entire room inside your nervous system. And here's the paradox. People often think you're calm, composed, maybe even aloof. But inside, you're running 1,000 simulations. You're adjusting your tone to prevent discomfort. You're crafting responses that won't trigger conflict. You're scanning every interaction for signs of dissonance or dishonesty. And because you rarely react impulsively, people assume you're fine. But you're not fine. You're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but a soul-deep fatigue that comes from being too awake in a world that's largely asleep.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now let's go deeper. Why does awareness feel like a curse in social spaces? Because awareness reveals disharmony. It points out the fractures beneath the surface. It tears down the illusions that make social interaction convenient. You notice when someone's being fake and you can't pretend you didn't. You hear the insecurity behind the bragging. You feel the boredom behind the small talk. You see the performance in the kindness. And most of the time, you say nothing. You smile. You play along. But internally, you're wrestling with the dissonance. And that dissonance doesn't just drain you, it isolates you. Because the more aware you become, the harder it is to feel like you truly belong. Not because you're superior, not because you think you're better than others, but because you see through things that others don't even know they're doing. And it's lonely to watch people bond over illusions you can't invest in. It's lonely to crave depth in a world addicted to surface. It's lonely to want real connection when most people are still hiding from themselves. But let's pause here and ask something confronting. Is awareness truly a curse, or is it a calling? Because what if this exhaustion isn't a sign that something is wrong with you, but that you're being invited into a different way of relating? A deeper one, a more honest one. What if social spaces exhaust you because you're not meant to conform to them? What if you're meant to transform them? You see, we often think of awareness as a passive state like watching from a distance. But real awareness is active. It asks you to act differently, to speak the truth when it's inconvenient, to hold space for discomfort, to pull masks off gently, not with cruelty, but with grace. And that takes courage, because it means disrupting the flow of normalcy. It means risking rejection. It means being misunderstood. But isn't that the price of seeing clearly? Isn't that the weight that comes with insight? There's a reason so many sensitive, aware people retreat from the world. It's not weakness, it's self-preservation. But if we stay gone too long, we risk forgetting how to connect at all. Awareness without connection becomes detachment, and detachment over time becomes despair. So we must learn how to re-engage, not by numbing ourselves, but by finding different ways to be with people. Ways that honor our depth, that protect our energy, that invite truth without demanding it. So here's the question I want you to sit with. What would happen if you brought your full awareness into a space and didn't shrink it, didn't hide it, didn't apologize for it, but just let it be? What if your sensitivity wasn't something to manage, but something to offer? The invisible labor of perception, why you're tired before you even speak, before a single word is spoken, before a handshake, before the first smile or nod, you're already working. You walk into a room and your senses activate like a radar, scanning for meaning, safety, authenticity. You notice who's holding tension in their jaw, who's avoiding eye contact, who's performing confidence, who's hiding discomfort behind humor. You hear the tone under the tone, the unspoken edge in someone's greeting, the hidden resentment behind a compliment. And though you haven't said anything yet, your brain is already a storm of interpretation, calculation, emotional filtration. This is the invisible labor of perception. And it's why you're exhausted before the conversation even begins. Most people think fatigue comes from activity, from doing, talking, moving. But for those of us who are hyper-aware, the fatigue begins in observation. It's not just what you see, it's that you can't not see it. You can't shut off the part of you that notices. And this isn't just noticing in the visual sense, it's energetic. You feel people. You feel the unsaid. You feel the internal conflict even when the external behavior is cheerful. And so while others engage in small talk, you're engaged in soul work. You're tracking layers. You're managing your own reaction to what you perceive. You're trying to make sense of 1,000 signals no one else even knows they're sending. This is why social spaces feel like cognitive marathons. You're not just participating, you're decoding. You're interpreting body language, reading emotional undercurrents, buffering your own energy, and often making micro adjustments to help others feel comfortable. You're the person who senses when someone needs to be included, when tension is rising, when someone's being subtly dismissed. You might even redirect a conversation, crack a well-timed joke, or ask the question no one else thought to ask. And while that looks effortless on the outside, inside it's a full-time job. But unlike actual jobs, this labor is rarely acknowledged. In fact, it's often invisible. People don't see the work you're doing. They see someone good with people, someone intuitive, someone who just gets it. They don't see the cost. They don't see the mental replay that happens after you leave, analyzing whether you said too much, missed a signal, made someone uncomfortable. They don't see the emotional hangover the next morning, the heaviness, the overstimulation, the feeling of having carried too much of other people's reality inside your own. And here's where the philosophical layer deepens. This kind of perception isn't just a social skill, it's a lens through which you experience the world. You don't just see people, you see into them. And that seeing becomes a kind of burden because it makes superficiality unbearable. It makes dishonesty intolerable. It makes disconnection feel violent. And yet the world runs on superficiality, dishonesty, and disconnection. So you're constantly in friction with the norm. You're constantly translating a world that doesn't speak your language. So what do we do with this? Do we try to desensitize ourselves? Do we numb out? Do we pretend we don't notice what we notice just to blend in? That's the temptation. But it leads to a slow erosion of the self. Because when you stop honoring your perception, you start gaslighting your own reality. You start doubting the very thing that makes you wise. And that's not just dangerous, it's tragic. Instead, we have to learn to name the labor. To acknowledge that perception is energy, that intuition is effort, that awareness is work. And once we name it, we can learn to manage it not by dulling it, but by protecting it. That means choosing environments that don't demand constant vigilance. That means finding people who are self-aware enough that you don't have to carry the emotional weight of the entire room. That means setting boundaries not out of coldness, but out of reverence for your own limited energy. And most of all, it means giving yourself permission to rest not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. To step back from the noise and let your system recalibrate. To remind yourself that you don't have to pick up every signal, solve every tension, decode every dynamic. You are not the emotional janitor of the world. So let me ask you something radical. What if your tiredness isn't a flaw, but a message? A sacred signal that you've been doing invisible labor in a world that doesn't even realize there's work being done. And what would it look like to honor that, to rest, not because you're weak, but because your perception is powerful? The depth dilemma. Why small talk feels like suffocation. You've been there. Standing in a group, drink in hand, nodding to a conversation that feels like it's circling a drain. The weather, the weekend plans, the new restaurant. The surface-level scripts we all seem to carry around like flashcards. You play your part, offer a smile, maybe even a clever quip. But inside, something is withering. Your mind isn't engaged, it's enduring. Your spirit isn't connecting, it's contracting. Small talk for someone wired for depth doesn't just feel boring. It feels suffocating, like being held underwater with a smile on your face. This isn't about arrogance. It's not that you think you're above conversation about ordinary things. It's that you crave substance not because it's trendy or intellectual, but because your inner world demands it. You live in layers. You think in metaphors. You feel in symphonies. So when the conversation stays shallow, it's not just disappointing, it's disorienting. It's like trying to breathe in a room with no oxygen. You long for the kind of exchange that wakes you up, that breaks you open, that makes you feel less alone in the world. And when that doesn't happen, you shrink, you withdraw. You start to question whether you even belong in the room at all. But let's be honest, not every situation can be deep. Not every person wants to explore the nature of existence over coffee, and that's okay. The problem isn't that others are shallow, it's that you're built differently. You're tuned to a different frequency. You listen for what isn't said. You notice the gap between words and meaning. You feel the ache behind someone's laughter. You're not looking for information, you're looking for truth. And truth rarely lives in small talk. So what do you do with that? Do you avoid every social gathering that doesn't promise philosophical discourse? Do you isolate yourself in the name of authenticity? That's the temptation, and many depth seekers fall into that trap. They retreat from the world, believing that connection isn't possible unless it's profound. But here's the irony: in rejecting small talk entirely, we also close the door to the possibility of depth. Because sometimes the doorway to real connection is paved with mundane moments. Sometimes, small talk is the prelude, not the performance. The truth is, not every deep connection starts deep. Sometimes it starts with a comment about the weather that turns into a memory about childhood storms that turns into a conversation about fear and freedom. Sometimes it's the waiter's casual joke that leads to a moment of shared humanity. The problem isn't small talk itself, it's staying there. It's pretending that the surface is all there is. And that's why it becomes so painful, because you're not just yearning for depth, you're yearning for permission to go there. And this is where your awareness becomes a gift. You can be the one who gently steers the conversation into deeper waters. You can ask better questions. You can model vulnerability. You can create the conditions where truth feels safe to emerge, not by forcing depth, but by creating space for it. Because here's the secret: most people want to go deeper. They're just waiting for someone else to go first. But that takes risk. It means being willing to break the script, to ask what's something you've been thinking about lately that no one's asked you. Instead of what do you do? It means being okay with the awkwardness that comes before authenticity. It means letting go of the need to be smooth and choosing instead to be real. So let me offer you a challenge. What if you treated every conversation as a potential doorway? What if, instead of judging small talk, you used it as a compass pointing you toward the places where real connection might be waiting, just beneath the surface? The sacred exit. Why you leave early, even when you want to stay. You've probably done it more times than you can count. You're at a gathering, a dinner, a party, maybe even with people you care about, and suddenly something shifts. It's not external. No one said anything wrong. No disaster occurred. But internally, you've started to detach. You feel yourself quietly pulling back, scanning for an exit, calculating the most graceful way to disappear. You make up a reason. You smile, say your goodbyes, and leave. And as you walk away, part of you feels relief. The noise is gone. The overstimulation fades. You can hear your own thoughts again. But part of you also feels something else: grief. Because deep down, you didn't want to leave. You just didn't know how to stay. This is the sacred exit, a ritual known intimately by those who move through the world with heightened perception, emotional depth, and a nervous system that registers everything. It's not an act of avoidance. It's a form of preservation. When the energy of a space becomes too loud, too fragmented, too misaligned with your inner rhythm, something wise inside you knows it's time to go. Not because you're weak, not because you're antisocial, but because your soul is asking for stillness, for integration, for space to return to yourself. But let's be honest, this pattern can be confusing. How can you want to connect and simultaneously want to retreat? How can you crave closeness and still feel the need to protect your solitude like it's sacred ground? This is the paradox of the aware, the sensitive, the deeply attuned. You don't lack the capacity for connection, you overflow with it. But you've also learned, often through painful experience, that your energy has limits. That when you override those limits, you pay a price. Emotional hangovers, mental fog, spiritual depletion. So you leave, early, quietly, sometimes abruptly, and often with a sense of guilt. You wonder if you're disappointing people, if you're being rude, if you're missing out on something meaningful, and sometimes you are. But the cost of staying often outweighs the value of what you might gain. Because staying for you isn't just about physical presence, it's about energetic participation. And when your system is already overloaded, staying becomes an act of self-abandonment. But here's the deeper truth. The sacred exit isn't just about leaving spaces that drain you. It's about honoring the part of you that refuses to betray your inner truth just to keep others comfortable. It's about choosing integrity over obligation, presence over performance. And that choice, though often misunderstood, is a radical act of self-alignment. Still, this doesn't mean you're doomed to a life of early exits and missed connections. The key is not to avoid social spaces entirely, but to create conditions where you can stay longer without losing yourself. That means curating the spaces you enter, choosing environments that nourish rather than deplete, surrounding yourself with people who respect your need for withdrawal without taking it personally, learning how to ground yourself in the moment, how to regulate your nervous system in real time, how to speak honestly about your limits without shame. It also means redefining what it means to show up. Because maybe showing up isn't about lasting the longest at the party. Maybe it's about being fully present for the time you are there. Maybe it's about offering your authenticity, your presence, your depth, and then knowing when to step away so you can return to yourself whole. So let me leave you with one final question, the kind that requires honesty and courage to answer. What if leaving early isn't a sign that you're broken or antisocial, but a quiet, sacred promise you've made to yourself that you will never again stay in a place where your soul cannot breathe?